The morning I found two strangers walking through my greenhouse didn't begin with a knock at the door. It began with my brother-in-law standing at the gate, holding it open for them, like the property was already his. Before I get into everything that happened, go ahead and hit like on this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story reaches. That morning lives in my memory down to the smallest detail. It was 8:14 on a Thursday, and I was in the middle of cutting the first round of lavender stems for the farmer's market that weekend. The air inside the greenhouse was warm and sweet, which is usually my favorite part of the morning. Then I looked up and saw them. Two men I had never seen before, moving slowly between the rows, studying my hanging baskets and the irrigation setup, like they were taking inventory of something that belonged to them. Behind them, through the glass panels, I could see my brother-in-law Patrick walking in from the open gate with his hands in his pockets. Not rushing, not acting like anything was wrong. He looked like a man who had every right to be there. I was 32 years old. Everything around me, the greenhouse, the fields, the little farm stand shed near the road, had taken me 6 years to build from nothing. I owned 18 acres in Culpeper County, Virginia, and every dollar that went into it had come from me. But let me back up, because what happened that morning didn't come out of nowhere. It was the end of something that had been quietly building for months without my knowledge. I started saving for the farm when I was 21 years old. At the time, I was working as a dental hygienist at a practice in Warrant, and my entire life was organized around one goal. Every time a hygienist at another office called out and the temp agency needed someone, I picked up the shift. Every time my practice needed someone to come in on a Saturday, I was the first to volunteer. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and one window that wouldn't roll down. And I lived in a one-bedroom apartment where the heat came through a baseboard unit that smelled like something was burning inside the wall. Some of my friends thought I was boring. They went on beach trips and bought new furniture and upgraded their cars every few years. I split chicken breasts 4 ways and packed my lunch every single day. I had a spreadsheet for every dollar I made and every dollar I spent. Some months, I ended up with less than $200 left after bills, and I still transferred 100 of it into savings and lived on the rest. By the time I was 26, I had saved $41,000 and qualified for a mortgage entirely on my own. I signed the papers alone at the title company on a Tuesday morning in October. Nobody co-signed, nobody offered money. My mother came to see the property once after closing and told me it was a lot of land to manage by yourself. My father nodded like he agreed. My sister Vivienne, who was already married to Patrick by then, asked if I was sure I could handle the debt at my age. None of them offered to help. None of them offered money, labor, or time. That was fine. It was my dream, and it had always been mine alone. The first 2 years were harder than I had expected. The farmhouse needed a new roof the second winter. A section of the irrigation line burst and flooded part of the greenhouse floor in January, and I spent 3 weekends pulling up the damaged sections and relaying them myself while watching tutorials on my phone in between cuts. There were months when the mortgage, utilities, and equipment payments left me with almost nothing, and I kept going anyway, because quitting had never once felt like an option. Clover Hill Farm started turning a real profit by my 3rd year. The lavender operation was small but reliable, and I built out a cut flower program that supplied 3 local florists and a wedding planner in Rappahannock County. The farm stand at the end of the driveway became something people in the area looked forward to on summer weekends. By year 5, I was paying the mortgage without stress and reinvesting the rest back into the property. The deed had one name on it. The mortgage was in my name. The business license was mine. The property taxes came to my mailbox addressed to me. There was no shared ownership, no family agreement, no verbal promise that carried any legal weight whatsoever. Everything connected to Clover Hill Farm belonged to me in every way that mattered. That single fact should have made any argument impossible before it even started. Instead, it became exactly the reason my family decided to come after everything I had worked to build. It started 5 days before that morning in the greenhouse. I had been out in the fields until almost dark checking on the second lavender crop, came inside exhausted and went straight to bed. My phone lit up on the nightstand at 10:43 p.m. I didn't recognize the number, but it was a local area code, and something made me answer. "Is this the owner of Clover Hill Farm in Culpeper County?" The voice was flat and professional. I sat up in bed. "Who's calling?" "My name is Stuart Hargrove. I operate a private financial services business. I'm calling regarding a debt of $48,000 connected to your property. I didn't understand what I was hearing. I don't have any debt like that. I'm not speaking about your debt, he said. I'm speaking about your brother-in-law's. Something cold moved through my chest. Patrick? Correct. Over the last 7 months, Patrick accumulated $48,000 in losses through a private sports wagering account. He listed your farm as collateral. A brief pause. We have a deed of trust on file that shows your sister holding a 35% ownership interest in Clover Hill Farm, with your co-signature on the transfer. I actually laughed. The short, disbelieving kind. That is not possible. He has no ownership in my property. He never has. Whatever document you have is wrong. I hope that's something you're able to clarify quickly, Stuart said, and his tone didn't shift at all. We have 30 days before we move to collect against the collateral. The call ended. I sat in my dark bedroom for a long time without getting up. I called Patrick immediately. No answer. I called my sister. No answer. I sent her a text that said, "Call me the second you see this. Someone just contacted me about Patrick's gambling debt and my farm." There was no reply that night. I didn't sleep. My mind kept searching for the version of events where this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a case of wrong information passed through the wrong hands. But the man on the phone had known the county. He had known the farm's name. He had known my sister's name. A scammer wouldn't have any of those details sitting in front of him at 11 o'clock on a weeknight. The next morning, before I had even made coffee, my mother called me. "Come over for dinner tonight," she said, and her voice had that particular careful quality it gets when she is managing something she doesn't want to say directly. I arrived at my parents' house in Remington that evening. Patrick already seated at the kitchen table with his hands folded in front of him. My sister Vivienne was beside him, not looking at the door when I walked in. My father Harold was standing near the counter. He looked at the floor when I entered the room. I sat down across from Patrick. "Did you borrow $48,000 and use my farm as security for it?" He looked at the table. "Patrick," I kept my voice level, "answer me." Vivian spoke instead. He got in over his head. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I stared at her. "What does that mean? Walk me through exactly what happened." My father cleared his throat. "What matters now is that we handle this calmly, within the family. We don't need to involve anyone else." I turned to look at him. "Handle what? The farm is mine. Patrick has no claim to it. Whatever paperwork this lender has is fraudulent." My mother came and sat down across from me. She set her hands flat on the table. "You have the farm," she said quietly. "You've done well. Your sister has 2 daughters. She and Patrick are stretched thin, and that is just the reality of where they are. You have more than they do." I sat with that for a moment. I looked around the table at all 4 of them. "Is anyone going to tell me how my property ended up in a lender's paperwork?" Silence. Vivian looked past my shoulder. Patrick rubbed the back of his neck. Harold drank from his coffee mug. My mother pressed her lips together and said nothing more. Not one person denied it. Not one person called Stuart Hargrove a liar or expressed confusion about what I was describing. They had all already known before I walked through that door. They had invited me to dinner because they expected me to absorb this information, forgive it, and quietly sacrifice what I had spent years building so that someone else could avoid consequences he had entirely created. I drove home in the dark and didn't sleep again. The Culpeper County Clerk's office opened at 8 o'clock the next morning, and I was there before the lights were fully on. I gave the clerk my address and asked for every document recorded against the property in the past 12 months. She came back with a short stack of papers. I sat at one of the public tables and went through them one by one. The mortgage record, a tax update, a survey amendment I had filed myself 2 years ago, and then a page that made my hand go completely still. A deed of trust. According to this document, I had conveyed a 35% ownership interest in Clover Hill Farm to my sister Vivienne 8 weeks earlier. That interest had been pledged as collateral for a private financing arrangement. I looked at the signature line. Someone had tried to replicate my handwriting. From a distance, it might have been convincing, but I had been signing my name on dental charts, insurance authorizations, and legal documents for over a decade, and I knew exactly how my signature behaved. The specific angle of the letters in my first name, the open loop at the end of my last name that I had developed in college and never lost. The forgery had the angle wrong. The loop was closed. Whoever copied it had seen my signature but not spent enough time with it. I had never signed that document. I had never sat across a table from Vivian and a notary for any purpose in my adult life. I had never discussed transferring any portion of this farm to anyone. I photographed every page before I left. On the drive home, I thought about who had access to my paperwork. When I moved from my apartment into the farmhouse 6 years ago, I had left a box of files at my parents' house while I was setting up my home office. Inside that box were copies of my tax returns, my mortgage application, several years of bank statements, and a dozen other documents with my signature repeated across them. I had left them there temporarily and then simply forgotten to retrieve them. That afternoon, I drove back to my parents' house. They weren't home. I have a key for genuine emergencies, and I decided this qualified. I found the box in the hallway closet, right where I had left it 6 years earlier. I spread the contents out on the kitchen table. Everything was there. My mortgage documents, my original deed, my tax filings, a copy of my dental hygienist license renewal application, years of my signature, organized and accessible, sitting in a cardboard box in my family's hallway. I walked down the hall and opened my father's home office. I'm not entirely sure what I expected to find. I moved through the room slowly, opening drawers. In the top right drawer of his desk, pushed behind a stapler and a box of paper clips, was a small padded envelope. Inside were 2 notary public stamps, still sealed in their plastic packaging. A printed order confirmation was paper-clipped to the outside. The order had been placed online 11 weeks earlier. I stood there holding that envelope for a long time. This was not a panicked decision made in a desperate moment. This was not something Patrick had thrown together overnight. When the debt got out of hand, someone had gathered my personal records, practiced copying my signature, purchased official-looking tools, constructed supporting paperwork, and filed it through the county clerk's office. A process that took planning across multiple weeks. And the only person with access to the documents that made the forgery possible was my father, whose house had held my records for 6 years. I photographed everything, replaced it exactly as I had found it, locked the house, and left. That evening I was sitting at my kitchen table going through everything on my phone when I heard my dog barking from the yard. A dark truck was parked just outside my gate. 2 men I didn't recognize were walking along the fence line, looking at the greenhouse, looking at the rows of lavender, looking at the farm stand shed near the road, with a slow, methodical attention that had nothing to do with admiring the property. I went outside with my phone already recording. "Can I help you?" I called from the porch steps. One of them walked toward the gate. "We're here to complete an appraisal on behalf of the lender. We need to document the greenhouse structure and estimate inventory value." I kept my voice flat. "You don't have permission to be on this property, leave." "We're just doing our job," the second one said, making a note in a small pad. I raised my phone so both of them could clearly see the screen. "This is being recorded. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the sheriff's department." They walked back to the truck without hurrying. The first man stopped at the driver's side door and looked back at me. "You might want to have a conversation with your brother-in-law," he said. "He already told us the flower inventory could cover the shortfall if the deed situation gets messy." They drove away. I stood at the edge of my porch in the quiet and looked out at the greenhouse, and the fields going gray in the evening light. Patrick had promised strangers the right to walk through what I had grown and put a number on it. He had offered my work, my land, and everything living on it as a bargaining chip in a debt he had built one losing bet at a time. Any remaining hope that this was a misunderstanding left me completely in that moment. The next morning, I was scattering feed near the barn when I heard cars in the driveway. Patrick and my sister got out of one car. My parents pulled in right behind them. Nobody had called ahead. All 4 of them walked toward me across the gravel, like they had already agreed on how the conversation was going to end. Patrick reached me first. His voice was tight and practiced. "You're really going to destroy this family over a piece of property?" I looked at him and said nothing. "This is family," he said. "Family is supposed to protect each other." Vivian was crying, the quiet, contained kind, arms crossed in front of herself. My mother came up beside me and put her hand on my arm. "Those girls don't deserve to watch their father go through a legal situation. You have to think about what this does to them." My father stood a few feet back and looked at the ground. "Sign whatever needs to be signed to make the debt go away," my mother said. "We'll work the rest out between us. We're family." I looked at all four of them. Patrick with his jaw set. Vivian not meeting my eyes, my mother's hand still on my arm like the physical contact might be enough to close the conversation. My father examining a spot on the driveway. Not one apology. Not one acknowledgement of a forged document. Not one person said the word wrong. They had come to my property expecting me to do what I had always done. Stay quiet, absorb the cost, keep the peace, because the peace has always been my responsibility to keep. I stepped back. My mother's hand fell away. I walked to my truck and picked up the folder from the passenger seat. Inside were photographs of the forged deed, the documents from my father's house, the image of the notary seals in their original packaging, with the order confirmation still attached, and the video I had taken of the two men at my fence the evening before. Then I called 911. My mother's voice went sharp immediately. "What are you doing?" I turned slightly away from them. "Reporting a forged deed filed against my property." The dispatcher answered and I gave her the information calmly. The fraudulent deed of trust recorded 8 weeks earlier at the Culpeper County Clerk's office, the forged signature, the unauthorized individuals who had come to appraise my property without any legal right to do so. When I ended the call, no one spoke. "You didn't have to do that," Vivian said. The crying had stopped. Her voice was flat. "Yes," I told her, "I did." 2 deputies arrived within 20 minutes. I handed over the folder and walked them through each item without raising my voice. The forged signature with its incorrect letter angles. The notary seals ordered online with no licensed Virginia notary attached to the purchase. The video of the men at my gate claiming appraisal authority over collateral that was never legally theirs. Patrick said once that it was a civil matter. The senior deputy looked at him without any particular expression and said that filing a forged deed with a county clerk's office was a Class 5 felony under Virginia law, and that was not a civil matter. Nobody had a response to that. The deputies collected copies of everything, took my statement, and told me the investigation would begin immediately, and that I should retain a real estate attorney to formally challenge the filing. I watched the cruisers pull out of my driveway and felt something I had not felt in almost a week, steady and completely clear about what came next. My family left without saying anything to me. 8 months have passed since that morning. I still think about it sometimes when I'm out in the field before sunrise, when the lavender is holding dew and the air is cold and the rest of the world hasn't started yet. How close it all came to being taken from me. The investigation moved efficiently once the evidence was in official hands. Within 6 weeks, the county recorded a formal cancellation of the fraudulent deed of trust. Investigators confirmed the notary seal used on the filing was purchased online and was not registered to any licensed notary in the Commonwealth of Virginia. A forensic handwriting analyst confirmed the signature was not mine. Patrick was charged with forgery of a public record and wire fraud. He took a plea agreement. He is paying back the debt on a court-ordered restitution schedule and serving a term of supervised probation. For the first time in all the years I have known him, there was no one in a position to absorb the consequences on his behalf. He's living them himself. Vivian cooperated with investigators in exchange for a deferred prosecution agreement. She had known. She hadn't forged anything with her own hand, but she had agreed to the arrangement, signed documents acknowledging her fictitious ownership stake, and said nothing to me across every dinner, every holiday, every phone call during the months this was being built around my back. I have thought about that a great deal, and I have come to the conclusion that there is no version of it that makes the grief smaller. I just carry it differently now. The investigators documented my father's role in full. The box of my personal records that had lived in his hallway for 6 years, the notary seals in his desk drawer. All of it became part of the formal record. He was not charged with a criminal offense, but his role in providing the documents that made the forgery possible was officially noted. My father and I spoke once after the case concluded. He said he had done what he believed was right for the family. I told him I understood what he had done and what it had cost me, and that I needed time before I could speak to him again. I still don't know how much time that will turn out to be. My mother and I have not spoken since the morning the deputies came to the farm. She made her position clear, and she has stayed in it. I respect that she knew what she was doing when she made that choice. Stuart Hargrove and several of his associates were eventually flagged during a broader investigation by the Virginia State Police into unlicensed private lending operations in the region. I gave a statement to investigators. There were other people who had been pulled into similar schemes. Individuals who had signed things under pressure, or had documents filed against their properties without any knowledge. Hearing those other accounts made it very clear why it had mattered to speak up, rather than stay quiet and absorb the damage the way my family expected me to. Clover Hill Farm is exactly where it has always been, all 18 acres. The lavender is into its third full rotation in the ground. I broke ground on a dahlia expansion last month that I've been planning for 2 years. There's a new coated gate at the entrance. I had it installed this past spring. A few people who heard about the situation thought the gate was an overreaction. They can think whatever they want. Before all of this, I used to tell myself that protecting yourself and loving someone were things that pulled in opposite directions. That if you really loved people, you absorbed what they did to you, quietly, without making it into something larger than it needed to be. I don't believe that anymore. You can love someone and still refuse to be destroyed by them. You can grieve what you lost and still be certain you did the right thing. My name is the only name on that deed. After everything that happened, that sentence means more to me now than it ever did before. That's the end of this story, but if it connected with you, leave a like and subscribe. There are more stories coming. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? I genuinely want to know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.